Hi guys, welcome back. Now I'm posting the case study solution from May-June 2024, paper 22 that took place on the 10th of May. I was a bit busy with the A2 exams that was scheduled, for the 17th, so could not make this earlier. Now before we move on, I want you to pause this video right now and share this video as many people as possible so that everyone can verify their answers and have a rough idea of what they were supposed to do in the exam. And if you feel after watching this video that you messed up, let me remind you that you still have paper 1 left, which can totally change the game for you. So without wasting any time and without further talking, let's get straight into the video. Now part A says describe what happened when, describe what happened to consumer prices in the Eurozone between March 21 and Feb 2022. And we can see that, they have given the CPI, the index of consumer prices for the 1 year period from March 21 to Feb 22. And so what's happening is that we can see that it is increasing. Like every month it is going up, right? And except for the month of July, where it fell slightly only. But anyway, so you sort of need to give the nature, not work on the figures, but just give the nature of this trend. So you will say that consumer prices have risen or increased over this period by 4.89%. How did I get 4.89%? Simply the index for Feb 2022 is 111.74. So 111.74 minus the index for March 2021 minus 106.53 divided by 106.53 will give you the percentage increase in price level or simply the inflation rate. Right, so 4.89% is the increase in your general price level from March 2021 to Feb 2022. And however, we see a small drop in the month of July, meaning that the price level went down in July. There was a slight deflation, except for the month of July. Every other month we see that the prices have been increasing. Anyways, short answer, three line answer, that's it. Now guys, moving forward, part B of the question says, with the help of AD and AS diagram, identify the main cause of inflation. Now, since the question is asking you to identify only, we just need to state the inflation and just make the demand and supply, the AD-AS model for inflation, and that's it, right? So you'll just draw the AD-AS diagram and you will shift the short-run aggregate supply curve to the left because it's a cost push inflation, and you will show that your real GDP is going down and your price level is going up, and that is it. And you'll just say that there's cost push inflation occurring in the Eurozone, and you don't need to write any other factors that are causing that because that's irrelevant. Your main marking by the examiner is for this diagram and for the cost push inflation mentioned. That's it. Since the command word is identify, right? So and how do we conclude that there's cost push inflation? Is because of the case itself is mentioning about rising energy costs because of the Russia-Ukraine ongoing conflict, and also it mentions about the shortage of labor supply, which is another contributing factor to cost push inflation. But other than that, you just need to draw the diagram and mention cost push inflation. Now moving forward, part C of the question says consider the extent to which shortage of labor supply in the Eurozone may have contributed towards increasing the inflation. Now what this question means is that as the case is suggesting two factors primarily for the inflation, the cost push inflation in the economy in Eurozone basically. So they're asking that out of those factors that have been mentioned in the case, because the case mentions 2-3 factors, is shortage of labor supply to what extent is the shortage of labor supply the contributing factor? That is what the question is asking. To what extent? So firstly, you need to talk about how shortage of labor supply is causing cost push inflation. Then you need to talk about other factors that are causing the cost push inflation, and then you need to in the end comment on the fact to what extent is this the contributing factor to the cost push inflationary pressures in the Eurozone. That's how the marking will be done in your exam for this particular case study. So you see a few hints that are given in the question is they talk about the rising energy cost because of the Russia-Ukraine crisis, which has resulted into oil and gas supply. And we have been hearing in the news as well how Russia-Ukraine war has caused supply chain disruptions primarily in the energy sector, and especially resulting in oil and gas shortages. So this is a very common issue that we are hearing in the news since the war had started. And and then it also, the case also talks about labor market shortages occurring in the labor market in the economy. And because so both these factors are obviously supply side driven. They talk about, and also, I mean, if we just ignore both these factors, the case itself talks about, it uses the word cost push inflation. I mean, it uses the word stagflation. So stagflation is a phenomena that where your unemployment and inflation both go up at the same time, and it occurs because of cost push inflationary pressures. Stagflation is a word because of it is two words basically: stagnation and inflation, where your economy is basically stagnating because of higher inflation resulting in an economic contraction because of cost push inflation. Your national income is going down, at the same time you have inflation. So that stagnation is causing your economy to sort of shrink in terms of real GDP, causing a rise in unemployment, and at the same time it's also causing inflation. So that's the biggest hint that is given in the case study itself. Anyways, so what you'll say is that labor shortages in the labor market have contributed to increasing inflation rates by putting an upward pressure. So it's basically putting an upward pressure on wages, because when there will be labor market shortages in the economy, then firms will compete for labor as it's short in the labor market. So firms would compete for labor, which will put an upward pressure on wages, which will increase the business cost of production, hence causing cost push inflation. Because when firms will compete for labor due to shortages in the labor market, then workers will have the bargaining power to drive wages up, and because firms would be hiring workers at high wage rates, or maybe poaching workers at high wage rates, offering them higher wages to incentivize to work for them than for other firms. So it will put an upward pressure on wages. You don't need to go into this detail, but you just need to mention about it will put an upward pressure on wages, increasing the business cost of production, hence causing cost push inflation. At the same time, you also need to mention that in the second paragraph, the labor market shortages, because that is causing higher wages, is not the only factor fueling inflation in the Eurozone, because the energy prices have also gone up, increasing energy cost across the economy, and that is because of the Ukraine-Russia war, causing oil and gas shortages. And in the end, you just say that it follows that the extent to which the labor shortages is causing inflation, because we don't know to what extent. The case hasn't mentioned that this is the most contributing factor, or this is the this is the 60% contribution is coming from the labor shortage, or 80%. So whenever we have in such a vague or ambiguous situation where we don't know, so this is the approach that we usually take, where we say that the extent therefore depends on the relative increase in the cost of production due to wages and energy costs. And if you see, in my classes as well, when I was teaching demand and supply situations, where in micro, when demand and supply usually change together, and we want to figure out to what extent or where would your quantity in the market go, where demand and supply is changing together, we usually say that which direction the quantity moves depends upon the relative magnitude of the demand and supply shifts, right? Because obviously we don't know where to what extent is demand going up or maybe supply going down. So in the same way, we don't really know that is labor shortage is the primary or the major contribution, or maybe the energy cost is the major contribution, as it's not mentioned. So what we'll say is that it follows that the extent will depend on the relative increase in cost of production. So in your marking scheme, you will have 1 mark associated for this particular line, where you say that the relative increase in cost of production due to wages and energy costs, it depends on. So you see that the case study solutions have to be short, to the point, and specific. And I've also mentioned this before as well, especially in my last minute tips video a day before your actual exam. Now, part D of the question is saying, using the concept of price elasticity of demand, assess the relative impact on poorer households, including those on fixed incomes, of rising prices of food and energy. 6 marks question. It's a very good question, interesting question, and I was so much into this question that I sort of wrote the whole answer. Anyway, so Cambridge has reserved 4 marks for analysis and 2 marks for evaluation for this question, including a conclusion. So what you'll say is that, first of all, you need to tell what rising food and energy prices means in the context of the nature of the goods itself, that they are basic necessities, and then connected to elasticity, the fact that how their elasticity is inelastic, which would mean that the total expenditures would go up as the prices of these goods rise. So the rising food and energy prices will obviously have a more severe effect on poorer households and also those on fixed incomes, because as mentioned in the case, right? And the reason is that food and energy are considered necessities, which obviously have an relatively inelastic demand, and which means that even when prices rise, quantity demanded will not decrease significantly, because consumers still need to purchase these goods to meet their basic needs. Now, what you did here was that you didn't sort of start by defining your answer what PD is, because that was not really needed, but you did need to mention a bit about what would mean that when the demand is inelastic. So you incorporated it while during your answer itself. So what will happen is the total expenditure of poorer households and fixed income groups will rise, because when the price would go up, the quantity demanded will change relatively less or insignificantly, causing total expenditures to rise, right? And then you will say that what will this impact have on how will this affect poorer households? Because you see, total expenditures will not only rise for poorer households, but they will also go up for rich incomes. Households with rich incomes and people with higher bargaining power and wealth, but obviously it will affect them less or maybe not at all as compared to poorer households, and that's why we say that the effect is regressive, or you can say disproportionate, basically. And this is one of the reasons why it causes income and wealth inequality as well. But anyways, you don't need to go into that direction. But what you need to say is that poor households and those on fixed income groups will obviously spend a larger proportion of their income on necessities such as food and energy compared to the wealthier households, right? Because they have less income, because obviously the expenditure on these basic necessities, the proportion of the expenditure, or you can say the proportion of their incomes that will be spent on necessities such as food and energy will be more for the poor as compared to the wealthier households. Hence, a rise in prices of these particular goods will have a more significant and direct impact on their overall budget for the poor, as the total expenditure on these goods will increase, and obviously that would mean that they might have to cut back on other discretionary spending, on other sorts of spending, right? Maybe cutting back a bit on education, or maybe leisure or something like that, right? So poor households will be and the thing is that poor households are obviously part of those individuals that they're already in those occupations that have low wages. So poor households will be in low wage occupations with low bargaining power for their wages to push their employers to increase their wages to in line with rising prices and inflation. And similarly, also talk about people with fixed incomes. Similarly, people on fixed incomes are not receiving any additional income support either to compensate for rising prices, right? Hence, which is causing a greater financial burden and financial strain and potential hardships when prices of food and energy, being basic necessities, bearing a very low PD, is going up. And that's what you need to elaborate on. That is why I've elaborated on this point, right? And also such households, the thing is that also there's another reason attached to it as well, why it is affecting. So the question is asking you, why is it affecting more for the poor households than people on fixed income groups? So you need to tell 2-3 reasons attached to it. It's not only the reason that they're poor, but there are some other reasons as well. So for example, there's another reason that such households, they lack wealth and they lack savings that are not earning them any interest or returns, right? So they lack wealth and they also lack savings, and those savings are not earning them because they don't have the money to sort of save in the bank to earn them interest. So they don't, so they lack those savings that are not earning them any interest or other sort of returns, which is again causing the burden to fall regressively on them, because during times of inflation, and when you have this food inflation going on as suggested in the case study for Eurozone, and energy prices are going up, such as the price of fuel and gas and oil is going up. So what will happen is it's going to affect the hardship more for the poor. And another reason is because of they lack the savings and they lack wealth, right? Because if they would have had savings, let's say, right, in the bank, probably they would be getting more returns from it, right? And that would be another source of extra income for them, to sort of make them go through these hard times, right? But they lack that. So what you'll say in the end is that you'll say that, hence it follows that poor households and those on fixed incomes, when they are troubled with higher prices of these basic necessities, the purchasing power of their fixed incomes, basically, or their limited incomes, and for poor households, this limited incomes, while people on fixed incomes are people on fixed incomes. So the purchasing power of their fixed incomes will decline, meaning they can afford less with the same money. You have to tell what it means actually. So meaning that they can afford less with the same money, which will actually disproportionately affecting them, right? While the upper income households and individuals with high bargaining power and those working in occupations with high salaries will negotiate higher wages, because people on upper income groups and individuals and those working in higher occupations like lawyers and doctors will and accountants and economists, so they will negotiate higher wages. And also moreover, these individuals, the high income earners, they also possess more wealth, such as property and gold, right? And during times of inflation, the value of these wealth, the value of wealth appreciates, which actually makes them richer. Not only it makes them richer, but it makes the poorer. And that's what, it causes a redistribution of incomes away from the rich, away from the poor towards the rich, causing a widening income inequality. And that is again a reason as well why inflation causes, income inequality to go up. But again, you don't need to mention this, but then the fact that you do need to compare and contrast why it's affecting more on the poor as compared to the rich. And one of the reasons is that these rich people, they have higher bargaining power. Number one, they possess more wealth. Number two, they have savings, which will earn them higher returns. And typically remember that the value of property and gold appreciates in times of high inflation, which will make them wealthier, right? So that's all. That's what you need to write. And this was a good question to test the economic concepts for students. Now guys, the last question is again very interesting, and it says that assess the advantages and disadvantages the European Central Bank of the European Central Bank substantially increasing the interest rates to control inflation. Now the case study has suggested us two things. First of all, it has mentioned that the inflation is driven from the supply side factors such as rising energy cost and the shortage of labor. And also the case study also suggests us that the central bank is facing with a dilemma, a conflicting situation where it is again pondering over the fact that whether it should increase the interest rates or maybe not change them at all, because increasing interest rates, it knows that substantially increasing interest rates might reduce inflation, but then it will weaken the economic growth even further. The word even further is used because already the economic growth is falling because of economic stagnation in the economy, because of your aggregate supply shifting to the left. And if it reduces the interest rate, it's just hoping that inflation would sort of come down, but at the same time it's also hoping that maybe the supply pressures would go down as well. Maybe the Ukraine-Russia conflict would end soon, and the energy prices would go down again. So it's sort of hoping that. But if it doesn't happen, then obviously it's something that and that is exactly the dilemma that it's facing, that maybe what if the energy prices don't go down later on, then what will happen? Or maybe it's thinking that whether it should just not touch upon the interest rates if at all, because it knows that increasing interest rates might although reduce inflation, but then it has other negative impacts as well, right? So it's a very good question. Now students, here, if you sort of just give out the advantages and disadvantages of a contractionary monetary policy, that is not just expected in this question. You sort of need to link it with the case and come up with a proposed solution, and comment on the narrative that whether the narrative that the question is saying, that substantially increasing interest rates will it or will it not help in controlling inflation. What are the pros and cons of it? As in, what are the pros and cons of increasing interest rates to control inflation, specific with the Eurozone, and specific in consideration into account the dilemma that the central bank is already facing. Right, so you'll start off your answer. This is the way that a good candidate should start off his answer, by saying that, increasing interest rates to contract the aggregate economy to reduce inflation may successfully, not will, but may successfully to an extent only bring down the inflation rate, because it will, pull back on aggregate demand via the reduction in consumption spending and investment spending and net export spending. Right, and you'll say, how would AD fall and how would inflation go down? So you'll say that as the ECB is substantially increasing interest rates, and the reason it's increasing interest rates is because it's a desperate move by the ECB to reduce inflation right away. So you'll say that such contractionary monetary policy will basically increase the cost of borrowing, and once the cost of borrowing goes up because of increasing interest rates, the monetary policy transmission mechanism kicks in to successfully reduce aggregate demand and cause inflationary pressures to go down via AD to fall to the left. And although if you make this diagram, it's fine, but even if you don't make it, but your explanation analysis is good enough, so it could work both ways. So you'll just say that how will your AD go down? So you'll say that the cost of borrowing is going up, so consumer expenditure will go down as the incomes of a lot of income will be spent on paying interest expenses, so definitely people will have less money, less disposable incomes to buy houses, cars and furniture, causing AD to decline. At the same time, firms will have less money left to invest in plant and machinery and business expansion, hence investment expenditure, I will decline as well. C is going down, I is going down. At the same time, your net export spending will go down as well, because a rise in interest rates will result in hot money inflows to go up, and hot money inflows will increase the demand for the currency. The currency would become stronger. The euro will become stronger. Euro is the currency for the eurozone, right? So the euro will become stronger, and a stronger currency means that exports will become expensive and imports will become cheaper. So X will go down while M will go up, and as a result, your net export spending would overall go down, and when this would go down, your AD will go down. So it will impact these three variables across the economy. That is what the monetary policy transmission mechanism is. That is how the monetary policy transmits or feeds through the economy, through this through this mechanism, by reducing CI and net exports, right? So as a result, aggregate demand would go down, and then you'll probably end up you can touch upon a few advantages of what in falling inflation would help the economy go through positively, because you could address the income inequality, which is already mentioned in the case as well. You'll say that falling inflation may help people on low incomes and fixed income groups by easing out that financial burden and strain on them, by improving the real value of their incomes, reducing income inequality, at the same time improving living standards and economic welfare for the overall economy as well. Right, so these are some of the pros that you can mention about how, and again, it's reduce substantially. Increasing the interest rates would hence reduce your inflation and would cause the inflationary pressures to go down in the eurozone, right? So yes, central bank might end up successfully reducing inflation, but again, like I said, it's only to an extent, and I'll comment on that. This is the keyword that the examiner would be looking for. May successfully, yes, okay, fine. You're like, okay, fine, yeah, it helps reduce inflation, but only to an extent. So these are the two most important power words to be used in the case study, right? Students who will say that it will be successful, or it will be successful, or it will not be successful, might not end up getting the maximum marks. And then here comes the evaluation, followed by a decent conclusion, and then you will say that although a substantial rise in interest rates may help in curbing some inflationary pressures, because inflationary pressures will go down, but only in the short term, or immediately, or temporary, as it is. So see, firstly, it's easier and more convenient and a more quicker way to reduce inflation by reducing AD, as compared to relying on supply side factors to address, as in relying on supply side policies to address the supply side problems in the economy in the eurozone, right? Such as addressing shortages of labor supplies and addressing energy prices and energy concerns and energy shortages and food inflation. So these are basically the factors that might take a long time to, might have a longer time lag to successfully bring inflation down, whereas compared to, interest rates might immediately curb some inflation. But then the problem is, so this is again a good line that you can write, but then the problem is that here, because writing this line would mean that, okay, fine, now you're telling the examiner, okay, fine, now my evaluation is starting, right? So you'll say that, the fact that although yes, a substantial increase in interest rates will help in curbing inflationary pressures in the short term because it's easier and quicker, but then you'll say that the fact that inflation in the Eurozone is supply-led, this is the main concern. It is supply-led, meaning that if the inflation is supply-led, then reducing aggregate demand may although have an effect, but that effect will be little and limited in bringing overall inflation figures down in the Eurozone. And that is what the problem is. That although yes, inflation might come down, but only to a very limited extent, because inflation is not demand driven. It's not demand per inflation that is causing problems in the economy. It is the cost push inflation, and cost push inflation requires supply side factors to be implemented or to be dealt with. Right? We need to address the supply concerns to bring cost push inflation down. So that is what you need to write. So the central bank is already, and the case study is also saying the central bank is already the central bank is already fearing stagflation. It is also mentioned here as well that the ECB fears that this will lead to further falls in economic growth, leading to a period of stagflation. Right? So the central bank is already, the thing is that the central bank is already fearing stagflation in the economy because already the cost push inflation is high and growth levels are going down. And if we further reduce AD by substantially causing interest rates to go up, it will worsen growth. Obviously, it will worsen growth, and it will cause economic growth to further decline and real GDP to further fall. Probably, and again causing cyclical unemployment. So already unemployment is high, but then it will further add to cyclical unemployment, will further increase as well. So unemployment value figures would go up substantially. Right? So, and this is exactly what the dilemma for the central bank, the European Central Bank is. Right? Because it knows that the factors are supply driven. So it's confused whether to sort of implement contractionary monetary policy or not. Because it knows that it will further reduce real GDP. And that is a disadvantage that you need to write about contractionary monetary policy with specific reference to the case study. Right? And then you will say that moreover, if the supply side factors that are causing inflation worsen, so let's say we do end up implementing contractionary monetary policy, but then like I said at the start of this question, that the European Central Bank is hoping that supply pressures will ease out. But what if it doesn't ease out? What if the war on Russia and Ukraine just keeps on? It worsens itself, and energy shortages worsen. Then what will happen? Then it will further increase cost push inflation. So you will say is that moreover the supply side factors that are causing inflation worsen. It will worsen economic growth, causing further fall in SRAS to the left. You don't need to make the diagram. Causing further cost push inflation. So further cost push inflation will occur. But the problem is that when cost push inflation would go up, so although you have implemented contractionary monetary policy to bring demand pull inflation down, so your demand pull because demand pull inflation means that you're trying to bringing down demand pull inflation means you're trying to bring the inflationary pressures by reducing AD. So you're reducing AD and hence reducing some demand pull inflationary pressures, but then it's offset by further cost push inflation. So overall, your inflation, your price level in the economy is not really going down. It's sort of unchanged, you can say. So it's going to offset, the cost push inflation will offset the fall in demand pull inflation. So overall inflation in the economy, or the CPI, would not really change or might end up going up further, right? So and then you could conclude by saying that hence to conclude, while increasing interest rates might be a short-term immediate solution, although it's a less effective one, and again, don't just say less effective, mention why is it less effective. As inflation is supply driven, the government must work on supply factors such as bringing energy prices down by offering subsidies, and come up with labor market reforms to address the labor shortages through investing in education and training and encouraging female participation rates. That's how you address the supply side factors in the economy that is causing the supply side problems, causing cost push inflation. So you'll say that addressing the supply side factors would increase aggregate supply, bringing down cost push inflation. At the same time, it will also cause your real GDP economic growth to occur. But then the main thing is that it will be creating a more long-term sustainable reduction in inflation rates, right? And that's how you could, sort of conclude your answer. So that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the solution, and I wish you all the best for your upcoming results.